The 35mm focal length is a versatile range for both photography and video. It's wide enough to capture background element and close enough to shoot more intimate compositions like coverage and portraiture. However, the 28mm lens is wider and significantly cheaper. Although it tends to be more close to a 24mm prime, I've seen many people take it into consideration when talking 35mm range. Probably they are on budget or maybe looking for a lens wider than 35mm, or they need a faster autofocus speed. Personally, I feel the 28mm lens is a bit odd focal length, and I only got it to make this video, by the way. The 35mm lens, on the other hand, is the lens I go with and the lens I use for a while. Today we'll put both lenses on test in a real photoshoot, so you make up your mind which one suits you the best. Omahe, and let's get started. Now, before discussing the real-world performance, I want to make an autofocus speed test first. I've heard some people believe the 28mm lens has a faster autofocus speed in video. So I set my Sony a7 III camera to fast and responsive autofocus settings. Here we have both lenses side by side, background and subject autofocus test. I feel the 28mm is slightly faster, where the 35mm has a smoother focus transition. Besides that, the 28mm suffers from focus breathing. Next we'll check the follow focus speed. First we get the 35mm f1.8 lens, and now we're jumping to the 28mm f2. Honestly, I don't like both lenses' performance, however, the 28mm lens seems to be doing slightly a better job. On the other hand, I tested both lenses in a commercial shoot and I ended up with two different moods. As I mentioned earlier, the 35mm lens can do more like wide to medium compositions, and here we have more of that impact. Again, it depends on the style and mood you like to produce. For a couple of reasons, the 35mm is one of my favorite focal lengths. I even prefer it more than the 50mm. With a 35mm lens, you can capture good wide, medium, and close-ups. Wider lenses will give us more like face distortion. Now, how the 28mm lens performs in such a situation? Will it be at the same greatness level as the 35mm lens? Alright, here we have a wide composition shot with both lenses. The 35mm is on the right and the 28mm is on the left. It's obvious the 28mm lens has a cold tone and the 35mm lens has a warm tone, even though when both images set at the same white balance, 5600 Kelvin. Indeed, I don't get a prime lens to shoot at f2.8 or f4. So here I'm only testing the 28 and the 35mm lens wide open at f1.8 and f2, and sometimes at f2.2. But anytime you can watch the full sharpness test at different apertures later in the video. So here both images shot from the same distance in order to show you an actual perspective difference. The 35mm is at f1.8 and the 28mm lens is at f2. Now we'll step a little bit closer with the 28mm lens in order to match the same frame as the image shot with the 35mm lens. Okay, I see no face distortion and the model looks great as well. However, the difference shows in the background look and the field of view. The 35mm renders more compressed background compared to a 28mm lens. Now regarding the image quality, both lenses' sharpness are very close wide open at f1.8 and f2. But here I feel the 28mm is a little bit sharper in some spots. And if you're a bokeh guy, the 35mm lens creates more blurry background wide open at f1.8, even though both images shot roughly at the same composition. And before continuing watching this video, I would like to introduce my Lightroom preset packs. You get 3 different packs for different scenarios. I applied some of the presets on the images we discussed today. And if you like the mood and the style I'm using here, for everyone watching this video, you can get any preset pack you want only for $6. Head off to omagomrawi.com/store, use the coupon code 35mm and get yours today. Enjoy! Now here we have another wide example. Actually, these lenses push me to take wide images more than close-ups. No doubt, this light shallow background is decent at f1.8 and f2. Earlier, we found the 28mm is sharper wide open at f2, but here it's clear that the 35mm is remarkably sharper at f1.8. I'm at 1000 shutter speed and there is no handshake at all. Now here the 28mm focal length looks better than a 35. I mean, when having a wide composition in a place. Let's say here in my perspective, I like the 28mm photo because of the foreground element, but both images are awesome. As I mentioned earlier, the 35mm lens works great on wide, medium, and close-up compositions. So here I decided to have some leaves in the foreground, and I wish the 28mm lens can handle that as well. Well, to be honest, it was much harder to get a good foreground frame with the 28mm lens, indeed because it's wider. Anyway, here we have both images side by side. Let me know in the comment which one you like more. I hope you enjoyed my feedback regarding the photoshoot images, and I wish that helped in making a better technical decision. In-hand overview. The 28mm lens is remarkably smaller than the big brother D35. And that leads to a 45mm filter size on the 28mm lens and 55mm filter size on the 35mm lens. Being that said, the 35mm lens weighs about 320 grams, 11 ounces, and the 28mm lens is 230 grams, 8 ounces. Now, the 35mm f1.8 has a custom button, which I never use, and a manual to autofocus switch button. And both lenses have no optical steady shot, and indeed you can rely on your camera sensor stabilization for a better performance. Minimum focus distance. Both lenses share different minimum focus distance if you wonder. The 35mm lens can do more close-ups compositions with 8.7 inches, 22 cm minimum focus distance. The 28mm on the other hand has 11.5 inches, 29 cm minimum focus distance. So here we have some examples about each lens. One in the studio with a controlled environment, and another one somewhere backyard. Indeed, the 35mm can do kind of macro images at some level, which is not an option with the other one. Sharpness and image quality. This test might be boring for some of you, so feel free to skip this part if you are already satisfied with what we discussed earlier. However, wide open at 35mm f1.8 and the 28mm f2, the 35mm lens is remarkably sharper in the center, as well as sides and corners. But we get some color fringing in the 28mm f2 lens. Now at f2, the 35mm looks also sharper than the 28mm, whether in the center or other parts of the image. And at f2.2, 28mm has a better sharpness in the center than f2, but is still softer at corners along with some color fringing. And the same chromatic aberration is still slightly visible at f2.8. And finally, at f4, the 28mm image quality gets a lot better, the 35mm lens still taking the lead. I hope this video helped in making your decision. However, I will be keeping the 35mm lens just because I love the focal length and I have a 20mm prime as well. But for someone who is considering to buy one of the 28 or the 35mm, both lenses are great and beautiful. Indeed, if you are on budget, the 28mm lens might be your guy. Thank you for watching, guys. Show me a thumbs up if you found this video helpful and bump that subscribe button for more camera geek reviews. This was Oma, and see you in another one.